This is a very exciting panel. We're going to be talking about data storytelling. We're going to be looking at kind of a little bit of a perspective here in terms of who should own crafting those stories. We're also going to talk about how do we balance the need for, or do we, personalization versus standardization in terms of telling those stories and crafting those stories. And then we're also going to, since we have to talk about AI in every session, right? We're also going to talk about how we see AI potentially helping or hurting the benefits of storytelling. But before we get started with that, I'm going to just quickly introduce our panelists today. And they're going to tell you a little bit more about themselves, but we also want each of them are going to kind of level set what's their definition of storytelling. So we can kind of understand the lens from which they are answering the questions and approaching the discussion today. So on the end, we have Nathan Macdad from PayPal. And I practiced and practiced. It's Ramesh Karpaga Vinayagam. I did it, yes. From Mass Mutual, newly at Mass Mutual, as I understand. And then Fred Shumate from USAA. And later on, he will do a marketing pitch if you need him to. All right. So with that, why don't we start with you, Fred? Sure. You can get a little bit about your background, but also just your perspective, definition on storytelling.
Yeah. So Fred Shumate, USAA, serve as director of what we call HR Analytics Partnerships. It's this kind of newer role maybe in the space, the translator layer, some kind of refer to it as. What we noticed was a gap between some of the great products that we were building, our dashboarding, some of the analysis that our advanced analytics teams were doing, not getting into the hands of those that need it, our business leaders, in the time that they need to be able to make the decisions that drive strategy. And so we employ storytelling often to be able to convey those kind of key insights. And I would stress that what the power of narrative really does is provides two things. One, it enables us to make the unfamiliar familiar. And then the second, it sticks. That when I leave the room, they understand the key points that I want them to take away.
Great, thank you. Ramesh?
Ramesh K. Thank you, Michael. That was one of the best pronunciation of my last names. Mass Mutual, been there for a little over a year. For me, I lead the people analytics and employee listening team at Mass Mutual. Everything that we do is storytelling, right? I mean, what is the essence of storytelling? It's an art, and it's an art of pushing a compelling narrative to your customers that enables action, right? And I'm using some loaded words in here, right? Narrative could be, a powerful narrative is a function of context, function of connecting empathy, function of understanding really your customers, right? And what is the function of storytelling? It should actually create an action. So for me, those are the two main facets of storytelling, whether it is a product we do or whether it is a story we need to tell. It has to make leaders think differently about a problem that they did before. And for me, the great examples come from my previous employer, Disney, where nobody beats Disney in storytelling. So whether it is a cartoon movie with no dialogues at all, they master the storytelling because they connect with their customers and the moviegoers, and they tell a story in a way it connects a diverse variety of audience. So for me, the storytelling is how do you connect with different customers, and we'll talk about that more, and that's the art of storytelling.
Thank you. Nathan?
So going third, yes, and. I've been at PayPal now for a little over 2 years. Before that, worked in LinkedIn, kind of doing HR data, but in a sales context. So it was really valuable of thinking about, providing context, really being able to tell that story. But I guess I would say the moment it really hit home for me is my wife does film and film editing. She does a lot of education around it, and she does video editing. And for a long time, we work in two totally different fields. They're totally different. She sits in a booth and edits, and I work on dashboards and data and PowerPoints. But as we were talking about it, it's like there's actually a ton of overlap because a lot of it is sometimes, I heard someone talk about it earlier, there's so much data in the HR space. So much data for all of us all the time. People come with so many questions so much. A lot of the art is getting people to really narrow down their story, and they come and they say, I want this and this and this and this and this. It's like, let's narrow it down. What are you really trying to say? What really matters to you? What really matters to your customers? What do they want to take away? And so, we're also filmmakers in a way.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's also about not coming up with a story first and then backing into the data, right? So we're going to move on to kind of the ownership, and it will probably become natural as you hear the panelists speak. But there's kind of like a little bit of a Goldilocks and Three Bears scenario that you're going to kind of see going on here. And so I'm actually just going to start with Nathan, and I'm going to ask you each different questions around ownership based on what I've already learned from them and their perspective. So Nathan, when we spoke, you feel that HR that should own storytelling. Can you talk a little bit about why you believe that to be the case?
Yes. And so in particular, a lot of my team and my role is like scaled reporting. So how are we developing like at scale data and reports and pieces to the business? And so to that point of context, HR is much better connected to the business than me and my team are. And so when they say, hey, we need this, or we need to develop a new, org health, or we need to develop an update for talent acquisition, or we need to create whatever, they are much better connected. And so I need to ask them why. Well, what's going on? What's really driving this? What are the goals that they're trying to get out of it? I can't build anything. My team can't build anything. We can't develop anything until we really know from you, what do they care about? So our team, definitely, we will still be experts on the visualization and on fonts and design and the data pipeline and how we're going to set it all up in the actual build. But we need HR to be the owner of the story, because the projects that seem to land and go well have that context at the beginning, and we need that from HR.
All right, and Fred,
Not so fast, my friend. The immortal words of Lee Corso. I'll take the opposing point of view, in that analytics should drive. You make key points, and I'm not going to argue with any of them, that it's at its best is a collaborative effort between HR business partners, business leaders, or other COEs, and our team. But what we are seeking to, and what I think where we have the key role to play and why we should own, is avoiding just the things that you had mentioned in a passing comment there about, but don't let the facts get in the way of the truth. The HR or the other owner has predetermined what their narrative will be. And now I'm just going to cherry pick data, or I'm going to ask you to data dredge until you find something that supports kind of the ultimate conclusion. And I think where we can avoid that mostly is, one, the analytics team not sounding just like a clanging gong or completely missing on deliver, is that relationship that we try to build with, right now, HRBPs, particularly in our use case, because they still own that relationship with the business. And if we're embedded with them in their meetings, particularly the larger scale stuff, not say, please don't go ask your HRBP, can I sit in with you and the senior executive they support, but just even being part of their town halls or being part of those regular cadences, receiving some of the communications they do at certain levels of your company will enable you to be tuned in and almost kind of shortcut that language, so that when we see something arise in the data, or they come to us, they're not catching us out of the blue and we're not catching them out of the blue.
Great.
But again, we're leading that, honing and owning that story, so that we make sure that we are delivering that with as little bias as possible.
What? All right, Ramesh.
It's very hard to disagree with either one of them. So my point of view is slightly nuanced, right? So for me, there is no one size fits all. I don't see HRBPs owning it. I don't see people analytics owning it. It's dependent on few factors in my case, in my point of view. First is the context, right? Who gets the context very well in situations? And you said the case very well. They are close to the business. So in cases where the context is key, there is a natural inclination to go towards one team. But then there are cases where the people analytics actually have to come up and they have to get better at understanding the context and deliver the narrative too. How does it work? In my the best model that works is like a symphony, right? Where your HR business partners and people analytics come together as a collaborative effort, like you said, but one leads another based on the cases of analytic maturity in the company, analytic maturity of your HR business partners, and the maturity of your business leaders. Because there are times when your HR business partners cannot take the load of explaining a very serious concept to business customers, but that's a maturity part of your HR business function as well, right? How do you bring them to that level where they're comfortable actually telling that story to your customers? And how comfortable are your business leaders understanding that from your HR BPs or your people analytics partners? So it is situation dependent. It is dependent on the analytic maturity of the company and your team and your HR business partners. And lastly, situation warrants it differently. So meaning, is it a predictive model that you want to explain with all the bells and whistles to a customer who runs the decision science team? Probably, then you probably will do a better job. Versus you're talking about attrition modeling and you want to just give the basic impact of the story of what do they need to do with that data or insights. Probably the business partner will do justice to that because they understand the real problem and the context better than that. So long story short, I think for me, there is no one way or the other. It's sort of nuanced, and it should work like a symphony where they both come together. And if they work very well, people won't remember that, oh, that's a people analytics journey or that's a HRBP story. They realize that it is a people story solved through data.
Love it. Love it. See the Goldilocks and Three Bears just right. Awesome. So the next topic we're going to move on to is kind of this, what level of personalization versus standardization. And I know that we originally had one question and we have another. I'm not going to actually ask both questions because you guys said you could just improvise. So let's talk a little bit more about a kind of level set, right? Should we be tailoring our stories to different audiences? Feel free, any of you to chime in there.
I can so, sort of middle ground, again. Sorry, no surprises there. Because the way we evaluate whether we customize, there are situations where you have to customize the story to a customer. But the question we need to ask yourself is, what is the scale and what is the impact, right? So when scalability is your concern, I think the important thing to remember is you cannot customize the product to every customer. Whereas when the impact is going to be big based on what you're delivering, you really need to talk to that in that language to that customer. And a classic example is, let's say there is a D&I data, right? You have the same data, same assumptions, same everything, but you're projecting that story to your COETA, and you're also projecting the same story to the D&I customer. Both come from a very different points of view. Right? They understand the problem statement is the same, but for them, what outcome they are looking for from your insights is completely different. Right? A TA might be looking just supply demand, top of the funnel. How do I get through? Do I actually get the right diverse slates? Where are the bottlenecks in my process, and how do I get the candidate experience to be great? On the other side, the D&I leader is looking at more getting doers on the top of funnel is good. But are we inclusive enough to keep them in the company? Where are the pockets where we are not doing that very well? It's exactly the same data, same assumptions, same everything, but they are looking for something completely different in your analysis. So in that case, if I just put one story and go to one of them, I lose the other one. And they both have to be there to understand whether your company is having great D&I strategy execution and what do they have to do differently based on what you just told them. So for me, in those cases, you have to do for the customer based on what you understand the context to be. But in most cases, I will always try to, what is the 80-20 here? How do I best solve this at scale for the most customers without having to create bespoke products because it's hard to maintain?
I do think, too, that sometimes this can be an argument against democratizing the data because in the wrong hands, right? You don't actually understand the context, and we want to make sure you're telling the right story, right? So Nathan, how about you? Examples of kind of where you sit on that spectrum, but maybe an example of where you actually had a situation where you did have to tailor based on the audience.
Yeah, well, and as you were saying that, I was thinking you're really talking about two different stories. You know, the story you're going to tell, the D&I story, is a different story than you're going to tell for like a talent acquisition story because the context for each of those is two very, very different things. Correct. So This last year at PayPal, we've launched kind of a higher level sort of organizational review. And actually our two partners here helped build many of these, so they'll know what I'm talking about. We had to create a very large sort of standardized narrative around what was going to be the flow for every single CEO staff review, because they were going to be looking at a lot of different metrics across each of their businesses. But at the same time, we knew that the exact data that was going to go in or what they were going to care about individually was going to be different. And so it was very much about, we had to build a standardized template and narrative, but then engage with our HR VPs early enough in the process that they could tailor it. And so it was really like, we're going to standardize the story. It's very specific to this one part, but the expectation is then we need to engage our partners with enough time that they can tweak what is in there, that they can delete some of the things that I wrote around capabilities and they can change it because that wasn't quite right. And so they can redo it a little bit. They can make tweaks. So we're giving them a template to work from. And the same was true when previously I was at LinkedIn. It was like a scaled narrative for, if any of you have seen LinkedIn business reviews, like the hiring narrative. So that was one that we owned. And so it's very tailored. There are very specific like lines of business reports, and you can make a lot of filters against them, but ultimately it's also up to that like salesperson to make those edits against the standardized template, because they need that. You know, it's difficult to create a scaled narrative that's going to hit every single customer. So agreed, like context really matters. But in both cases, it's let's build something standard and make sure that we're engaging early enough that the person who's going to be the one delivering it or presenting it has time to look it over and make the adjustments necessary.
Fred.
Let me tell you a little story about data storytelling gone completely wrong.
Back,
and I'm going to draw on some experience prior to my work in corporate America, and I guess official is a different practice in people analytics, campaign elected politics. I was working at a survey research firm and got into political polling. And to this point, I'd been building surveys and pulling sample and then analyzing, doing those things. But for the first time ever, I was going to get to present to a client. Sitting congressman, incumbent from Ohio. And I can tell you, I don't know if I slept the night before, looking through all the crosstabs and this, that, and the other. And we got started. The first question was reelect. How likely are you to reelect? And it was something north of 60, which in politics, that's rock solid. Person's not going anywhere. And the congressman on the other end of the line said, "Stop! Let me stop you right there." And he said the 4 worst words you'll ever hear in data and analytics. Your data is wrong. And I'm falling on myself now. And I go immediately into sampling methodologies and weighting. And I probably threw a p-value in there. Let me stop you right there.
Don't
if you
do
are
that.
ever trying to sell a story and you bring a p-value into it, you are in. Better know your audience very well. Unless you know that person's looking for that, you were kind of in trouble. And thank goodness, and I could probably murder him at the same time, the senior partner from the back finally joins the call and he says, "Congressman, let me ask you one question. Why would you say that?" "Well, I was in the hardware store the other day and I talked to 10 people and they all told me they were voting for me." And it clicked. And so he went back to one of the near crosstabs. Districts was largely split between 2 population centers. And he said, "Hey, let me ask you about this town. I know you're from here. Let me ask you about this. Is there something that way? Looks like maybe you should have some room for improvement there." And immediately, my opponent's been working hard in that area. Some of my supporters have seen yard signs. All that to say that we found common ground. He found that one thing, that little bit of personalization that hit that person where they were and then greased the skids for the rest of the conversation. And I'll say that to say 2 things. One, when you're in the room, know your subject matter and your data well enough, not that it's in the slide, but that you can adapt as you need to. And one of the key important parts of storytelling that we often overlook, and I would urge you to internalize yourself as well as those that are on your teams, that is that other one is always be listening. Even in that session, be adaptable. Don't have your story so it's like coding. Don't hard code. Don't hard code your variables. Be adaptable enough, know your subject matter well enough that when you do hear some feedback or those type of things, you can adapt.
Yeah, and I think that also includes words and phrases, semantics, adapting it to their language as well. Yeah.
Now, all that said, that is a heavy undertaking in terms of labor and capacity. We want to personalize everything and for everyone to feel that I'm delivering this into your hands just as you need. When in reality, we're often building tools and delivering analysis across a broad spectrum of stakeholders.
What a great, go for it. You're about to say it.
So, whatever we can do to flatten the curve, shorten the time it takes to get, to Insider to be able to build that level. And that's where I think we have the opportunity really to partner with, and I'll use the broader term of AI, machine learning and things, and I'll give an example there, as well as the promise of what generative AI may provide. First and foremost, again, USAA, 37,000 full-time employees spread across 3 lines of businesses, multiple layers on layers on layers. We do a decent job at the enterprise level. We see all those things. We kind of know those things. Where we have challenges is finding those things in data maybe at others. And so I went to our data science team, and I'd actually been listening to this, and I forget the subject matter of the program on NPR, but, just labeled myself. But they were talking about getting something like, if you're trying to find a needle in a haystack, the fastest way to get to it is to burn the hay down. So you burn the stack. And we did that, but I went to the data science team, like, can we do something similar to that? And he said, well, let me think about it. And what we developed was a series of stat tests that just tell us where we don't need to look. Now, it leaves us still with a pretty, a good amount of things that we need to, walk through and vet. Maybe there's a story there. But the biggest thing was it took us from like 4,000 dimensions down to 100. And on a monthly basis, that is a huge amount of time savings and a great lift. The second being, though, is the promise of Gen AI, then is how do we spend, again, this 80-20 rule that's often spoken of, and 80% of the time building your data set or doing analysis, 20% delivering what you actually kind of want to do. Is to even shorten that down, particularly that 20%. How do we create narratives? How do we haven't talked about this, but I know it's been shared before, a common operating language. These are my words. Can we use generative AI to, one, be a better translator, I think, on some levels, and then 2, become more and more concise. And we only get so much room on a slide. We only get so many words in a room.
So, and I think that's a great tip, and we're going to talk a little. You like what I was saying? He was like, set it up, because that's our last topic. I personally have, I need to tell this story to this audience, and I will feed it. I'm going to be meeting with the CEO for the first time of the company. He thinks this way. I know he's going to care about this, but how should I word this email? I've done that, right? How do I tell the story of the importance of why we need to have this conversation? So we're going to move into that. Obviously, how do we scale, right? And so one of those ways may be through technology, kind of 2-part, or it's really 3 parts. Continue to elaborate on how we see generative AI actually being able to help with scaling and personalizing. Where are we maybe really concerned, about its potential uses? And if you happen to have any examples where you are using it today. So 3-part question, I guess.
Start down here.
Yep.
So I cheated on this question by actually asking ChatGPT last night.
Love it.
How should people analytics and storytelling work with AI? And I'll tell you, the ideal approach, collaboration. The most effective strategy is to leverage AI for its strengths, data analysis, pattern recognition, and real-time adjustments, while relying on humans to interpret, contextualize, and convey the narrative. This collaboration ensures that storytelling is both data-driven and emotionally engaging.
Some of them chew your food before you swallow.
Yeah, and so, balanced control, and I think that's the risk. So I won't read all of the balance.
But did you ask Chat? I don't know which tool you used. Did you ask what are the
I was sitting there.
Risks? No, what are the risks?
Yeah, well, it's got
of
the balance
leveraging
control.
you to help us with this.
Yeah,
Okay.
and very much of sometimes it gets it wrong, or sometimes it misses the context, or just like the work that I think we all do of. It gives you a start. I think David said yesterday, solving the blank page problem of I need to start with something. I need to create something, and that takes a lot of work. And sometimes it's hard to know exactly what to create, or you have a lot of different ideas. And so, for one of the example, we had to create capabilities. So that was part of our standardized large deck. We had to create capabilities for every single business unit across the organization. And at a certain point in time, it was like we didn't have enough data. We did not have enough. We had a lot of great data, but we didn't have enough. And so it was, okay, ChatGPT, you got a lot of data. Tell me, what are the capabilities for legal? What are the capabilities for product developers and product owners? And it gave us a list, and it was a starting point to then allow them to continue to do it. So it was a very manual process. It wasn't automatically generating and spitting into a slide for us yet, but it could. And so that collaboration of it's got a lot of data. It helps me, and we use it. Some of my team uses it to help them get started with SQL code to get you started and get you there. It'll provide you some insights. It'll provide you some. And I've seen some AI insights that have been great, and some you go, that is not interesting at all. And so that balance, that overseeing is really important to make sure that it can be valuable, but we can add an additional lens on top of it.
Ramesh, what about you?
Yeah. So I cheated as well. So I asked my
Can we
friend.
really call it cheating at this point, though?
No, it's not.
It's
It's getting
augmentation, right?
augmentation of my thoughts here. But where I see is I'm kind of again similar story. I'm in the middle ground. I'm not jumping up and down here yet because I see it as two. Right? One is an experience play, another one is an efficiency play. Where I see this really helping us is in the efficiency play, right? So we don't have to write all the SQL code anymore, right? We can get started pretty quickly, the blank page problem. Those areas, I feel a lot of potential for us to focus on the more important things to do. Right? That's where I get excited about. Today, what do we use it for? Completing emails and doing wordsmithing and all of that, which is doing a great job. But where I'm not completely caught on is the experience play, right? The models are not caught up with cultural norms, right? It doesn't have the context very well. It doesn't understand your customer like you do. Eventually, it'll get there. Like you can make it role play like you understanding a customer, but I don't think we are there yet. So that's where I feel like it's a good combination between humans to improve the efficiency and not do the things that the AI can do very well, and do the things only you can do very well today, so which is the experience play, where you understand your context, understand what your customer is looking for, and be able to connect with empathy on their problems and come up with a solution that is not AI-driven.
Fred, do you want to say anything more on that?
No, I love the way
I
I love the way you explained that and laid out those two. I think the efficiency play is probably the most obvious and probably the earliest. And going back to the session you mentioned earlier, my people need to spend 90% of their time consulting and 10% on the data. Yeah. That's where I find that experience. Right now, we're not completely flopped on that, but we are upside down there because we have to spend so much time producing heads downing, and at least where we sit and where the need the gap we're trying to fill is that relationship gap, understanding and building all those context type things. And so, yeah, the efficiency play first and foremost is where I'm looking for it to have the immediate impact.
Yeah, and I'd add to that too. I mean, I'm new in my role, but I think what I'm already starting to hear is, we're a mighty lean team for listening, and there's only so many deep dives that we can do. Hey, could you do one for me? Could you do one for me? So there's part of that is like, do we set expectations on which groups and how often do we do that? But how do you can't just turn the data over. Right? I mean, yeah, you can give your favorability scores, but what's the real story? What do I need to focus in on? Because it's death by colors and, favorability scores and like, the difference from this year to that year. So I am looking forward to seeing how technology can help scale some of that work, make it easier, right, to get there so that we can help more people and be more targeted in where we actually are able to put that energy. So we actually have time for questions. So we have about 5 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up. And Amit, your hand went up first, very slowly, but it was first. So, all right, microphone, and then we'll get started.
So early on in the conversation, I think somebody made the statement, storytelling without action is overhead, perhaps. And I think everyone agreed. I just ask you to reconsider a little bit, because storytelling also has some other functions of sharing your reputation externally, of embellishing your culture. You build a culture through the stories you tell. And so I think we're probably focusing on trying to get a particular message across, but storytelling in general has other functions too. But the question is this: why are we in HR expected to bring milk and cookies? Isn't it a little bit infantilizing the function by constantly trying to fit everything into a story? Why can't we just show the data like everybody else? And it's not too much to expect. If somebody can understand a balance sheet, they should understand the p-value.
So when I got here and this thought, oh, this is chat with friends among friends, two friends, and then I saw Amit sitting on the front row. So that's a master storyteller sitting on the front row. What is he going to ask? And then he goes, right? So thank you for the great question. For me, this is my take on why should we be the infant. The difference between finance numbers and people numbers is about experience, right? It's about employees. It's about people who have, this is about their life. They spend a big part of their day at work, and everything you do has an impact on how they actually spend that time at work. So versus finance is completely, again, I hope Jeff is not here, but
He wouldn't mind, I can tell you.
he wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
So for me, finance is kind of, it is removed from that, 2 layers up. So they have the capability to just go with pure number play and not about experience play. But human resources, there's a human in it. The way we humanize the numbers is telling that story. So for me, that is more important than the actual number itself. And to your point, I completely agree with the storytelling. Enabling action is probably just one case of it. The reason I was going there was, we always talk about people analytics ROI. We like, hey, what are you doing? What did you achieve? And for me, if we have to establish an ROI as a function, we need to think about how many times we were able to change or make a decision better than it would otherwise have been. And so for me, that was the connection between storytelling and action. But absolutely, it not always is, it's creating awareness, right? Creating awareness does not mean there's going to be an action out of it, but it is an effective storytelling too. So,
Yeah. And I think what I took away from that was what you were saying is don't do storytelling for the sake of doing storytelling.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Have a purpose of like why you're doing that. Yeah. Great.
Thanks, good answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would only add to that point. Like if someone just wants headcount numbers, I don't need to write a data. There's no, I don't need to give you a story, right? Like here's an
your
Excel
table.
spreadsheet. Like here's a pivot
Figure it
table. You're
out.
good. There's no need for a story. But when you're trying to influence or when you're trying to get people to change action, because it's not just HR. I think across the board, you look confirmation bias and all of those other biases we run up against. Just putting data in front of people often may not be enough to actually change their mind or get them to do something different. And so it very much depends on your goal.
Yeah, I think I'm going to use a good example of turnover, right? And my last company, we had some divestitures, we had some rifts, right? And if I just put that turnover chart in front of them, they'd be like, why is our last 12 months are so high? We have a problem. There are these blips. Like, what happened? Like, they don't have the context of the story behind it. So that maybe the top of the organization might be able to infer like why that is, but without actually providing. And so, I do a lot of, even in the actual graphic itself, to help them along, right, to understand how to interpret it. So I think sometimes it can be very dangerous to just put the numbers in front because, again, I kind of go back to, I can make that mean anything I want it to, right? So, question, yep.
Yeah, this is on, but, so just a question about how you actually select a narrative. And often when you're dealing with analysis, and especially if it's a nuanced question, there is a particular talk track you can take. And often there might be another talk track or a third talk track that might not necessarily be as equally powerful or as readily evident from the data, but it's there. So how do you select what path to take when crafting the narrative, whether you wanted to call it a narrative or storytelling for your end clients?
I would start by saying, get feedback, especially from somebody who hasn't seen it before. So I think anytime we're building anything, both in scaled narrative or for one-off reports, I I always think about, well, what do I think the story is based on the context, based on the feedback? So am I hitting the things that I've been told are the most important? And then after I build that, okay, now we need to find somebody that we think is going to care and have some context to the knowledge, but hasn't seen any of this before, and like, do they get it? And if they don't, then I need to go back and maybe I need to pick my narrative, or I need to tweak my narrative. But the important value of like, you know, that initial user feedback is a critical part for me of how I try to build.
I also think too, there's also sometimes some of those stories we need to actually run by legal too, right? So we may find there's a story, but can we actually share that story? So that's another point. So I think we have time for one more question.
Fred. All right.
Did he win?
Did he win? Yeah, I mean, that was more importantly, we got the next poll. He re-upped. So that's
So you won.
consulting.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Please give out a hand for our panelists today.